Now, for our last portion of the show, we are going to dive into the 2028 Democratic primary contenders and what trans rights will mean for the next president of the United States. So, with all of that said, there was a poll released 2 weeks ago, actually, about the 2028 Democratic contenders. Now, this poll was by the Manhattan Institute, which, they've done polling even with New York City mayoral race and other races around the country, but they do show us directionally on where the winds are headed and what people are saying. So, in this particular case, they had polled essentially 3 groups of Democrats. They had general Democrats, which was all Democratic voters, different ages, race, ethnicities, right, backgrounds, all different, but weighted across the electorate. Then they had Black Americans who are registered as Democrat and Hispanic Americans who are registered as Democrat. So, 1,782 people were polled. Now, this isn't like a typical poll where everyone says, oh, it's just on phone. Well, this one was also conducted via web and SMS text capture, meaning that they would send messages to potential voters via text. Then in that text would have a quick copy and like a link, where then voters would click the link that would bring them to an online poll where they would then read and then answer the questions. So this did include some phone landlines, but it did include SMS text, which is, I think, a wonderful way to get more people engaged and involved. Now, not everyone's answering a random number, let alone a text, right? But at least it does reach people who we know generally don't answer landlines. Within this group, right, the general Democrats, we'll focus on them for the remainder of this poll. General Democrats were polled in support of which Democratic candidate they would, be most likely to vote for in the 2028 Democratic primary. Lo and behold, out of those who had answered that they were likely to vote or very likely to vote, those 2 groups, together within the general Democrats, had voted for former Vice President Kamala Harris, winning 23% of that vote. Then it would be Gavin Newsom coming in a close second place with only 20% of that vote. So those who said they would likely vote in a primary, 23% they'd vote Harris, 20% said they'd vote Newsom. Now, interestingly enough, out of those who are very likely to vote, they also, voted for AOC coming in 3rd place. However, it was only by 7%. So a very steep drop once you think about the grand scheme of all the contenders, and AOC was 3rd. So this poll is showing like a very definitive choice between Harris and Newsom as the top 2 contenders. But that makes sense. No one else has jumped in the race. Yes, people are making moves, but we know they're not like kind of low-key campaigning the same way Harris and Newsom are, right? So in this poll, one of the most interesting questions related to trans rights, okay? Now, we know this is the same general Democrats, the same group that's supposed to be representative of the electorate. Now, in this poll, they asked for children under the age of 18, should they be playing on sports teams based on the gender they're assigned with at birth or the gender they identify with? And remember, these are general Democrats. They had answered that 46% believe that these young trans Americans should play on the team that based on the gender they're assigned with at birth. Now, this is in contrast to the more progressive side where we believe that trans Americans can play on the sports team of their gender that they identify with. One is at birth, one is how they identify, right? One is conflating sex with gender, but the idea is that we should allow the students to choose what teams they play on, and we should not be forcing them, right? This is how we dignify trans lives, and this is how we just create, a better, more diverse culture, more team collaboration. So, with that said, it's interesting that there was a 46 to 34% split. Now, more importantly, right, there was also 20% of those polled of general Democrats who are not sure, meaning that 20% leaves wiggle room in order to educate, inform. So we know right now the Trump regime And Project 2025 agenda is looking to, erase trans lives from our history and let alone our everyday life. However, the Democratic side, who should be showing some sort of opposition, they have been so silent, deadbeat. They have been so weak on trans rights and trans issues, trying to shy away from it. Based on that poll, Newsom and Harris are really catering to that 46% of voters who really believe that, these decisions could be based on the gender assigned at birth. So when we hear Newsom say culturally normal and we hear Harris, not really stick up for trans rights or not see her do it in her record, but also being more forceful and bold in her support for the community, we need more from both of those leaders, especially if they're trying to earn our vote. We also found out in this poll, there was another question asked. Do they think that the Democratic is too radical on transgender rights? So that is a very pointed question. Of course, radical or transgenderism, right? Using these very triggering words that get people riled up. But the point is, the general Democrats who answer that is split between, strongly agree, somewhat disagree, strongly disagree, right? So out of those breakdowns, only 12% strongly agree. 12% of general Democrats really believe that the Democratic Party's gone too radical on transgenderism. 12%. So that's actually a really good sign. Granted, all y'all know we wish it was 0, right? But the key thing is that it's only 12. That is movable, right? Now, if it was like 30%, I'd be worried. It's like, wow, 1 in 3 people, but or 33% would be 1 in 3 people. But I guess point being is 1 in 12, that's like 1 in 10 almost, a little over. So that gives me hope that we can change more people's minds, right? So then we can really see a real shift in the culture in how we, fight for trans rights in our politics. So on the opposite end of that spectrum, right? Who are the ones who strongly disagree? Well, lo and behold, that number is 28%. I definitely do not believe that the Democratic Party has been too radical on transgender issues. Definitely not. So the fact that 28% strongly disagree and only 12% strongly agree, that says that we are on the winning side right now. The Democratic Party, while they are not good on trans issues, the party itself is generally more supportive, right? And then when you look at the somewhat agree and strongly agree, that turns out to be like 34% versus the strongly disagree side and somewhat disagree side. Those two, that makes up 47%. So 34% think, Dems have gone a little too radical. Meanwhile, 47%, almost a majority. The plurality, though, 47%, we say that it has not been too radical on transgender rights and issues. And that is where the party is headed, right? We know that because we know as younger folks start learning and being more informed about these issues, right? More young folks are becoming, are generally more progressive and more queer. We know that the ratio of those who identify as openly as LGBTQI+ has risen, especially with Gen Z, the youngest generation. So we see these trends happening, which has been good for trans rights. Now, in the context of this poll, if we know that the old guard, has a lot of control, moderate vision, for the party, we know that they won't last forever. So there's no reason why we can't embrace new leadership and embrace, more of the progressive issues of the day, such as trans rights being very much deserving a place in our American politics. But then more importantly, we will be embracing new ideas, creating new culture and creating a better, stronger society. So the more we can actually talk about trans issues and really get more folks on board, this is good for everyone. The idea that we have a chance to really inform people's minds, have them break through what they think is traditional. We're going through these growing pains, right? So I understand when some people don't get it right away, or they're just set in their ways. So we will have to do our best to pull them out of it and let them know and really get them to understand that, like, trans people, we are all the same. Humans are dignified and we all deserve that dignity, especially in the United States of America. So, with this poll, it gives me hope that while Democrats are more supportive of trans rights, we have a lot of work to do, and we should be applying this pressure not only amongst ourselves and the electorate to be more supportive and open for trans rights, but more so for our potential elected leaders. If Gavin Newsom and VP Harris are the two that are getting the most attention in terms of the Democratic Party's most likely nominees, then they most likely need to be getting on board with trans rights. Right? We deserve better. Trans folks deserve better. So let's make sure that people understand the issues, but then also we're bringing them into the fold. If they make a mistake, give them grace, right? If it's an ongoing thing, have that conversation to make sure that it's not an ongoing thing, but also bring them into the fold, treat them with respect, right? If we are looking to bring them on our side, we have to really do our best to just have some patience and understand, because that is how we'll build and grow. And that is suitable for democracy. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate your support. If you like what you heard and want to learn more, then make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Don't forget to follow along on Instagram and TikTok for more news and updates. You can follow along at NSFD_pod. We have a lot of work to do for trans rights and a lot to do to organize and get more people involved so we can actually have a better future for the LGBTQIA plus community, not just here in New York City, but around the country. Well, we've got work to do, and as you know, democracy is not suitable without you.